Hello and welcome to another episode of the Climate Conundrum podcast. We're today addressing a very important issue that is basically at the forefront of almost all discussions surrounding climate change and climate impact. And to introduce it, I think a very relevant poem from kindergarten comes to my mind, which is "Water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink." Obviously we're discussing water management, conservation, and the efforts towards that, especially from an Indian context. And to do that, we have a very special guest here today, Siddharth Desai. He's an expert in the field, not only from the business point of view, but also has worked extensively in policy and in research related to water and water management. So Siddharth, welcome to the show. I'm going to quickly introduce you so that people know who and what work you've been doing. So Siddharth is a joint managing director at Kishor Pumps, a leading custom engineering pumps manufacturing facility based in Pune. He's also worked with government ministries and departments and several municipal corporations and water and sewage boards across India on various aspects related to pumps, pumping management, equipment, and the water and sewage sector. Not only that, he has been working with various entities on developing a water security roadmap for urban management in India, particularly focusing on a decentralized approach for wastewater treatment, recycling, and reuse from a policy and technological preparedness perspective. I think that's a very key point that I'm going to keep addressing and bring your attention to in this episode. Not just that, Siddharth is also a council member at the Sea Ganga, a policy think tank on river basin management associated with the National Mission for Clean Ganga under the Ministry of Jal Shakti. He's been serving on the advisory board of this think tank, but also on another one, which is called the Indian Biogas Association. And he's the water domain expert on the City Innovation Exchange Committee of Pimpri Chinchwad Smart City in near Pune. So that's quite a promising expertise in this domain, and I'm hoping to shape a thought-provoking but also relatable discussion through this episode. So yeah, let's splash into this complex topic together, Siddharth. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, glad to be here.
Right. I think I want to first begin with a very basic question of it's peak summer here in India. We're recording this in early April. Obviously, all the headlines are dictating how water tables are running low, water shortages will soon be announced. We're also reading headlines about Bangalore's water situation at the moment, which is pretty alarming. So I think where I want to begin is, can you give an overview of what is happening in different urban and rural settings in India? And basically, how do we deal with these water management issues?
Sure. So again, thank you, Sanika, for having me here. It's glad to be here. I don't want to go into the numbers typically in terms of the water capacity per capita, because those are printed all over the news channels. What I would like to explain is some of the nuances of what it means when we talk about water management. So when you talk to the officials, government officials, or your local utility boards, ULBs, the focus when they're confronted the question of what about water availability, especially in the summer months here, they often talk about only about how much is available in the dams, in the reservoir, and what they are doing to kind of augment that, in a way. So when it comes to water management, it is actually a very narrow focus on supply management. So talk about how much water will be available to supply to the users. It could be industry, it could be domestic, or whatever. What we need to understand is that water management in its holistic view includes supply and the demand. That how is the supply being managed and also how the demand is being managed. the latter part, that is the demand management, is actually not that well addressed, and that is exactly what one of the issues what Bangalore is facing right now.
Right. Okay.
You know, they have actually they had actually sufficient supply at the beginning of the year, but because of unregulated demand in terms of over extraction of groundwater, people not taking care of how the water is being used, no metrics in terms of water use efficiency. So that is, to me, the most important aspect, that when we talk about water management, it needs to be looked upon as a supply issue as well as a demand issue. Only looking at supply issues in terms of supply augmentation, that is how many dams I can build, how many tanks I can build, that's like trying to fill a leaking bucket.
Of
No
course.
matter how much water you fill into a leaking bucket, it's still not going to get full every time. So we need to look at demand management aspects in conjunction with the supply management, and together, what many experts are referred to as the urban integrated urban water management. I'm talking urban right now. So,
Right.
I integrated IUWM, that is integrated urban water management, is actually the right policy approach that needs to be taken for any region in its isolation. So if you take Bangalore as an example, a lot of the water experts there in Bangalore right now are talking about the lack of integrated urban water management and how it needs to be done from a long-term perspective.
Okay.
Similarly, for other cities needs to be done. And when we go beyond cities, also in the rural areas where the agricultural demand kind of outstrips any other demand, that also needs to be taken into consideration as a whole. Now, uh, the part about demand management is also a complex one, because it also involves some level of enforcement and to some extent also an economic impact on the users. And that's where the administration, which is the policymakers and the politicians, they are a bit reluctant to do that. And naturally, I mean, we live in a country where votes matter the most at the end of the day. So how do we balance out the electoral process, at the same time not provide water that is such an essential commodity for absolutely free? So this is a balancing act that any administration, any government needs to do, and that's where the nuance of demand management also comes in. So one is what the users can do, and one is what the government and administration also needs to do. Now, when you talk about the overall situation in summers, that's every summer we see we are
And
sitting
it
in
just
Pune.
keeps getting worse every year.
It's getting worse and worse. But the whole focus is still on how much we can increase the supply. People by themselves also, I mean, as much as the government is to blame for the water crisis that we are facing, not just in Pune, but across India, the citizenry is also equally complicit in this particular debacle, because we don't care about how much water we are using. And I'm speaking from a sense of guilt also, being a Punekar, because Pune actually uses, and this is established fact, Pune actually uses the most amount of water per capita anywhere across India.
Oh, wow. Okay.
An unfortunate
That is a
reality.
hard-hitting fact.
Yeah. So normally, if you see the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs Central Ministry guidelines, they have prepared a guideline that for urban water supply, 135 liters per person per day is the norm, which is sufficient to have a standard of living which is which is acceptable. Now, there could be some variation on the plus and minus side depending on which city, which economic zone you live in. But Pune, on an average, it's about 250. And if you go in some
135
pockets
to
of Pune,
250. Yeah.
that's the average. And when you go in some pockets of Pune, it goes as high as 350 and 400 liters per person per day.
Wow.
So we need to be mindful, as much as we can put the burden on the administration to do their job. It is actually, when it comes to water management, the demand management plays a more critical role. And that's where the citizenry, as citizens also, we need to be responsible in terms of how we manage and use our water.
Of course. Yeah. So what I hear from you is this integrated water management approach, right? But then there's a whole different world of management to do and demand as well for the urban areas as well as rural. Like you said, urban areas use water for very different reasons. Rural demand is mostly on agriculture. So just take me through what happens on a policy level when we are trying to figure out who gets how much water, how, where does the large share go?
So when it comes to urban water, the supply calculations are based on the population census. Unfortunately, we haven't had the population census since 2011 now in India. So right now, all the calculations are based on 2011 census, extrapolated to the current year based on an assumed growth rate. So based on that, and with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs guideline of 135 liters per person per day, that is how much the policymakers try to estimate at the end of each monsoon, that how much water is available in the reservoir, so how much would be the allocation. Having said that, water being a state subject, each state government is allocating certain water from their reservoirs for the geographical regions. For example, in Pune, we take water from the Khadakwasla circle primarily. There are some other sources, but Khadakwasla primarily circle. So the irrigation department of the state government of Maharashtra, they decide that based on the population census and the extrapolated growth in population, including the merged villages into Pune, X TMC of water would be available for Pune on a yearly basis from the given reservoirs. Rest of which they allocate to other purposes, including agriculture, rural side of it. So when it comes to urban water management, it's primarily based on the 135 liters per person per day multiplied by the population census, adjusted to the current extrapolated to the current population using some assumption.
Okay.
When it comes to rural water, it's primarily about the acreage and the agricultural practices there, and that is what is now needs to be looked at very carefully, because uh, agriculture in India is the largest consumer of water. Any savings, any efficiency measures that would be introduced in agricultural practices, that can go a long way in increasing the overall availability of water in India. And one of the aspects that has been talked about and is being talked about is the cropping patterns. So in a state like Maharashtra, which is actually on the east of the Sahyadris, it's actually a rain shadow, and furthermore, it's a drought prone towards more eastern side. But still, we are growing sugarcane in Maharashtra, which is a water guzzling crop.
Heavy,
So this disconnect between the resource availability and the demand because of sugarcane, I think that exacerbates the matter much more. Similarly, we have been hearing about how rice and paddy or paddy and wheat are being grown in Punjab, which is now a water scarce region, and cropping patterns are getting affected. So rural demand, although it is dependent on the acreage of how much and which type of water is grown, I think the efficiency measures which can be introduced in the agricultural systems, that can go a long way in improving the overall water availability. So it is very difficult for the administration to kind of regulate the water that is being used for agriculture. They can do it a lot more for urban India, but not much for agriculture and rural India.
I think that also depends largely on what kind of crops farmers are opting for, the market is allowing them to opt for. I guess this is where the discussion on how important millets are becomes comes back, and I'll be doing another episode on food and climate change. Want to tackle that issue as well. But yeah, I think these are such interrelated issues that one without the other discussion remains sort of half tuned.
Right.
So absolutely, agriculture practices go hand in hand with water usage, and vice versa. So the policy scenario would also probably be dictated by what choices people are making in the end.
Yes.
But you were on the board of actually working out a strategy for water management in India. So what is happening on that front? Where are we? Is there a hopeful situation? I'd like to see some ray of hope and want to know from the horse's mouth.
So, how I would put it is that, first of all, water is a state subject in our constitution. So it is managed, each water is managed by, the state manages its own water at every level. Now, when it comes to an integrated water management plan, be it urban or rural, the fundamental aspect we need to look at is what are the supplies and what are the demand sources. So supplies are typically the precipitation that is getting collected into the reservoirs. Then you have groundwater, which is again the source is the precipitation, but we take it from groundwater and we take it from reservoirs. The basic source is precipitation. And the third, especially on the coastal sites, is in some states, not entirely, is desalination.
Right.
Where you take water from sea and you remove the salts and the hardness causing elements and you convert into a drinking water quality parameter. The fourth aspect, which is not much talked about, and a lot of states are now doing it, is what is called the recycle and reuse policy. The wasted water, or rather now it is being called as used water. So used water is recycled, treated and recycled and looked upon as a supply source again. So on the supply side, you have the reservoirs, the groundwater, desalination, and now the treated wastewater.
Right.
And on the demand side, you have industrial users, you have agricultural users, you have domestic and commercial users. So essentially, the challenge before policymakers is you have the supply sources, you have the demand sources. How do you balance that so that the supply and demand is matching? The biggest challenge in this is that across India, the cost of supply far exceeds the price that is, or the revenue that is received from the services or water that is being delivered. Okay. Again, water pricing is a huge topic in itself, and there are a lot of there is a huge political economy associated with that. So I won't be able to go into the details of that, but essentially we need to acknowledge the fact that the price that citizens, industry, farmers pay for water, if they pay, whoever pays and whatever they pay, is certainly not sufficient to cover the costs of supply of and managing all the infrastructure on the supply side and distribution side. So the challenge before policymakers is, in addition to managing the supply and demand, how do we get additional sources of funds? I mean, how do you raise tax at some other level to subsidize or cross-subsidize the water infrastructure, which by itself is in deficit since memory immemorial, I would say.
And this is, sorry, I'm going to cut you, but this is supply also from this point of view of, say, building more dams and like water harvesting systems,
Absolutely.
or just to actually transport the water from door to door?
The collecting the rainwater in dams, reservoirs, that is a part of the costs that eventually go into the total system. So there is this concept called levelized cost, that whatever bulk capital expenditure that needs to be done to set up the supply infrastructure, that cost is recovered through a unitized, for example, 5 rupees per kiloliter is the average rate across India. So 5 rupees per kiloliter is how much is being charged by the users. And that includes the cost of all the capital expenditure that has been gone into setting up the dams, the infrastructure, the pumps, the filtration systems, treatment systems, everything. And they operate over a period of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Right.
That. So the challenge before policymakers is essentially that they need to keep the supplying the water, but the economics right now don't work out. So how do we then look at sources where they can raise finance from other sources and subsidize the water supply so that the water supply need not stop or cannot stop?
Correct. I think this automatically makes me think of how individual responsibility sometimes trumps waiting on the government action. Absolutely. Because I truly believe that India has enough rainfall in most of the places over monsoons to be able to accommodate individual needs. So if we harvest rainwater in urban areas and rural areas in like localized communities, maybe the supply and demand side sort of lopsided view that we have right now could actually be very well managed. But then that brings me to another question, right? You mentioned something about equitable use of water, and that really is true, right? India is a diverse country with a large socioeconomic difference in population. So how much water you get directly depends on where you live, how rich you are, how gated your community probably is. So is there a hope for any equitable distribution method in the country, especially because we are so diverse?
Yeah. So it's a very good question. And water equity, that is whether a certain community is receiving water in the right quantity at the right price, which is defined as water equity. I think it's a core concept behind water security. Now, how it can be done? Well, again, we need to harp back to the point that it's, as you rightly said earlier, that it is the individual that also needs to take equal, if not more, responsibility to ensure that the equitable distribution happens across the geography. And as you rightly said, we have enough of water or rainfall that is there for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. We need to do our part. And the reason why I'm harping this time over again, that there is a common wisdom that everything that needs to be done by the government. I mean, they have a lot of work to do, and they are not doing it to the best possible extent, which everyone agrees. But I think citizens on their part also have to do a lot of things which they're not doing absolutely.
Right.
For example, how many of us are mindful about closing the tap when you are brushing our teeth? It's a very simple thing. When you stand in front of your sink, you don't need water when you're brushing your teeth. But we have seen several examples, and even in popular culture, we have seen that there's a common practice to keep the taps running. So how do we introspect and have behavioral changes within ourselves first, so that the water, we don't waste water? See, we have enough water for our usage, but not for if we are wasting it.
Right, of course.
Similarly, companies who are aggressively promoting reverse osmosis based home water treatment units, I think that also needs to be, well, regulated is the wrong word, but that needs to be, the public needs to be educated about the pitfalls of that. There are two issues with that. One is that when you have a reverse osmosis system in your house, depending on how much you use it, but for every liter of water that you produce, at least 1 or 1.5 liter is wasted in the reject, depending on the kind of water you have. Secondly, if the setting is too aggressive in terms of the TDS quality, that is a total dissolved solids, it can remove all the minerals that are actually essential for your body for that. So we need to really be mindful whether RO is the right approach for each of the households, and that household needs to decide it for themselves, and that's where awareness and education comes in play. That how this can be done, because in most of urban India, which is supplied, at least in the core areas of urban India, which is supplied by municipal water, piped water, you don't need RO. A simple disinfection system is good enough.
In a similar way, I'm wondering if there are any other misconceptions about water management or even to do with our daily sort of interaction and use.
Absolutely. So we have a common practice across many regions. I don't want to generalize it, but what I have seen is if a water is in a bottle or a jug or something, if it is more than a day old, you throw it away. It's not needed at all. If there are no biological matter in the water, there is absolutely nothing that is going to go wrong with the water. So there is no need to throw away that water at all.
I mean, Bisleri sells it, right? So
yeah,
why would we throw away?
Correct. So I think these are some of the misconceptions that if we store water for a long time, it gets polluted. It's true if there is a biological contamination in the water, but normally if you have pipe supply, if you keep it in a cleaned jug or a glass container, I mean, the chance of it getting contaminated is very minimal. Secondly, the misconception is that if I'm using my groundwater, I can use it as much as I want. I mean, on the face of it, it's logical, but it's not, because groundwater is actually a common good. It's what nature and the society has provided you under your building. So it should not be treated as a private property, but unfortunately it is. You will see, and that's where I'm coming back to the point about the 250 or 400 liters per person per day consumption in Pune in some areas, where they are washing cars with pipes, and it is groundwater many times, or if not groundwater, also fresh water, and also they are washing their footpaths and compounds with piped water. So this is absolutely criminal in today's world.
Right.
So the misconception is that mera pani hai, my groundwater, I'll do whatever I want with it. But that's where the sensitization in terms of a larger social good needs to come into play. And I would actually like to, since I'm on this point of social awareness, I would like to just highlight this point about Cape Town and Israel.
Hmm.
It's a case in point because 2018 Cape Town was actually just 2 or 3 days away from running out water completely.
Okay.
Completely, absolutely zero. So they were calling it day zero. Uh, uh, so they had a levels of emergency like you have in any kind of let's say a storm warning. You have level orange,
Mhm.
red, or some those blue, orange, red, those kind of categories. So similarly, they had water emergency measures which were categorized. There was a clear communication that now we have reached a level of orange where you're not allowed to let's say I don't know the exact demarcation, but they were only they were restricted a lot about where they can use water, and it
Right.
was a criminal penalty if they were caught for not using it. Similarly, red levels. So this, along with a very uh, spread out, widespread educational campaign to sensitize the population on the need to conserve water,
Hmm.
was run across Cape Town. And there are a lot of case studies that have been put out since then about how they executed it. And just by these, just by sensitization of the population, the demand fell by 20 to 25% in Cape Town. Just by sensitizing the people and making them or imbibing a sense of guilt if they were wasting water. So we often underestimate the impact of communication on the general public, but
Hmm.
done in the right way and in a continuous way, I think there is a lot of upside to that as well in terms of conserving water. So there is, in terms of water equitable, there is hope, but it's to be done by each and every single person and not just depend on the government.
Right. No, thank you for highlighting the use of communication. As a communications professional in
Yeah.
this space, I believe it helps to have people actually talk about why it's important.
Yes.
So I remember in school, there was a whole like bunch of discussion on how we need to conserve water. We are the only ones who are responsible for this. And I think I've built a habit that I cannot have the tap running while brushing teeth, for example, like you pointed out. Are there any good examples like that from India that you remember or come to your mind about how behavioral change has actually helped a certain region or any particular place?
So I think uh, what we are seeing in Bangalore right now is kind of in that direction because people have actually started valuing water. So the whole issue behind this is we don't value water because we don't think about it. Recently, I was presenting at a conference wherein I started my talk asking how many of the participants or attendees were knowing how much uh, bills they were paying their bills for monthly mobile phones. So almost everyone raised their hand. The next question I asked is how many of you know how much electricity is you're using per month? So maybe 50% of them raised their hands. The third question was how many of you know how much water bill is you're receiving per month? And almost none.
Yeah,
So this kind of demonstrates the fact that it is not in the popular culture in terms of the discussion around water.
absolutely.
In common management parlance, you can't manage what you can't measure. So unless you
Mhm.
measure, you can't really manage. So uh, common people, they have to take proactive measures in terms of installing water meters, and just for the purpose of self management, I would say, or self discipline, try to understand how much water we are consuming on a daily basis and how much we can reduce it further. I think that'll go a long way in addressing the challenge overall.
This was one of my questions. I'm glad you brought it up that water meters are being now installed in many places. What is the policy on that? Like, is this going to be a pan-India system to understand how much water is being pumped and distributed? Or will it be in certain areas depending on the state government? How are we going about it in India right now?
So so in many cities, for example, Delhi, the water meters have been installed very long, I mean, since a very long time now. So, the simple idea behind installing water meters by the utility boards or the government is that they want to measure how much water is being
Of course.
distributed and consumed everywhere. But what I feel is that if you see again the experience of Pune, we are still not we don't have full meters across 100% of the society everywhere. Beyond that, we also don't have the meters at individual homes. We have meters at the society level, but the individual homes, they don't have meter. So that needs to be done as fast as possible. But at the policy side, the government is very clear across India that metering has to be done, and that's where the 24/7 water supply schemes are also being rolled out. But what also is missing is that again, the issue is coming back to the right communication. That there are often misconceptions among the general public that meter lagaya matlab abhi charge karna chalu ho gaya. So I think that also needs to be addressed. The fears of the common population also need to be addressed. See, charging of water is not wrong. They have to pay for what they're using. How much to pay, after how much to pay, how much liters they can consume without paying, that's a different thing. But they need to accept the fact first that they need to pay for water.
Of course.
But
and right now you're saying many places actually get water free of cost?
yes. So, but there are two aspects to the metering part of it. So one is that the government needs to have a handle of measuring how much water is being consumed. Whether that metering, that data will be used for charging water or not, that's a very different level of
Another
important.
next level conversation.
But knowing how much water is being consumed is required for the government to plan their infrastructure, to plan their budgets and everything. Now, this is where again the lack of communication, that the government, either because of lack of funds or because of lack of understanding, they don't have that level of engagement with the public. We are putting the meters just to measure, we are not going to charge you. So then, then if this fear is removed from people's mind, then at least the metering part can be completed as quickly as possible. And just by metering water correctly, and the data that we generate, that we will be generating from these meters, I think that will go a long way in terms of, for the policymakers, in terms of planning for the infrastructure. In fact, one very interesting aspect is about a reverse incentivization scheme, which is you benchmark how much water is being consumed by certain users based on the meters that you have put in. And incentivize users that if you don't use as much water, whatever saving, we pay you for the saving that you do. Because
it's in the similar to the power sector, right? If you put a solar panel, you're going to put back energy in the grid, you save money. I think that could be a very interesting way to incentivize people into conserving, but also letting the government measure.
So there is actually a case study in Punjab. So they had come up with, I don't remember the year, but they had come out with a scheme called Pani Bijli Bachao Paise Kamao. So the target was to save groundwater actually. But because electricity is free, they don't know they just keep the pumps running, the borewell pumps.
Wow.
And the water is being pumped out. There is no metric or there is no control over that. So what the government said was they put in the electricity meters, they benchmark the electricity usage, and they benchmark that certain farm is using, let's say, 200 kilowatt hours or units per month. Now, if that farmer is going to use less than 200 kilowatts per month for the next month, they will be put an incentive. So then there is an incentive for the farmer to switch off the pump, because they're going to be paid for not using the pump.
Right.
But at the same time, the real impact is protecting groundwater.
Positive reinforcement would definitely help in these.
So these kind of reverse incentivizations are very crucial for a good like water, which is neither completely private nor completely public. So these kind of policy interventions are very crucial, which are being considered, but yeah, I mean, they need to be considered more aggressively.
Right. Okay. You mentioned two things earlier. One was groundwater tables and desalination, right? Both I want to address, but first I think there's a very obvious question that bothers me each year in monsoons, which is every year it rains and I see the water flow away on the streets. Now, the second issue that is happening in at least in places like Pune, right, which is rapidly urbanizing, is we have end-to-end cement roads now. There's barely any place for the runoff water to even get absorbed into the earth and replenish the water tables. Um, Along with it, there are these new species that keep coming up every year that we are really depleting our groundwater reserves. Um, could you give an overview on what's happening at that front? Is it really as bad as the situation is being talked about?
Yes. So, as you rightly said, because of the concretization across the city, the percolation, the natural percolation of rainwater has reduced, which has increased runoff because water does not enter the ground, and it has increased runoff, and that has led to flooding, flash floods, and what we see right now. So, one way to address it is obviously have functional rainwater harvesting systems in societies, at least. I mean, that's not much you can do on the roads. The roads, this is a responsibility again of the government, that the roads have to be supported with stormwater drains, and the collection and the stormwater covers have to be at the appropriate locations. But from a building perspective, the rainwater harvesting systems to recharge the aquifers, I think that's a very long way. Unfortunately, what happens is in across India, what we have observed is that the rainwater harvesting systems are purchased or installed only from a purpose of getting the occupancy certificate and complete the building.
I've heard,
But
yes.
whether it's done rightly, what are wherever the bores are drilled for groundwater recharge, uh, are the percolation rates acceptable to the total water that would be collected on the rooftop in rainy season? These calculations need to be done.
If I'm an individual interested in just like my neighborhood's sort of upkeep on this front, what are the signs and things I can look for and perhaps even check that, okay, is this happening in my society or
So I think there needs to be, first of all, a desire by the entire society that this is essential. Because even if one person is not aligned with the overall intent, I think that can harm the overall objective of these kind of projects. But having said that, there is a scientific approach that is needed to install the rainwater harvesting system. So there are companies who offer services in terms of screening your premises to locate the best location for drilling the bore wells, and then installing the rainwater harvesting systems, including the filters, the gravel, whatever is needed.
right.
And they do it very scientifically. There are companies who do it scientifically. So the intent is very important, that societies need to do it for the purpose of recharging groundwater, not from the purpose of just compliance. Because the moment it's done only for compliance, there are quality issues, and it does not happen. So the intent needs to be strong. The intent needs to be backed up by each member of the society. And then there are companies who can offer scientific solutions to install these rainwater harvesting systems. Again, we need to be very careful about which water is being collected, because we need to be very protective about the groundwater, because it's the most difficult to remediate if something goes wrong.
Okay.
And that's where you cannot afford any kind of oils or greases, which are there common in the compound area from cars and tires and all that. So we should not allow that water to collect into the rainwater harvesting systems. Primarily, balconies and terrace water should be collected in rainwater recharge pits for that. So yeah, as a society, as I said, the intent is important, and once the intent is aligned with across society members, then there are companies who can offer this solution on a scientific basis. And it's not expensive actually from a total society budget, yearly budget perspective. I think although you cannot really have a payback calculation, but something that again it aligns with the intent, that you can allocate a certain budget and get it done.
Right. I think beyond compliance also, just if you have a system in place like that, wouldn't it just be easier for you in like dry months or times when the water supply is running low? You probably have something to fall back upon.
Yeah, so there are two aspects. What you are referring, I think, is that you collect the rainwater during monsoons and store it underground. That is one way of thinking about it. The second way, that is more distributive in a way, is to recharge the groundwater aquifers.
Can both be done with the same setup of a system? Like, for example, if I'm collecting rainwater, some of it can go actually into the aquifer, some of it can be
Right.
harvested.
It's so rainwater harvesting too. So the concept of managed aquifer recharge is nothing but the opposite of water extraction from the borewell.
Mm-hmm.
Only thing is the filters need to be reversed or we put the other way around. So you cannot use the same bore that you're using for groundwater extraction for
Right.
recharge.
Okay.
There different metrics, different methods. Because while you're pumping out, there is a pumping power that is there. Whereas when you put in, it's more gravity. So percolation rates in the ground and all those matter. But the coming back to your point about an insurance for the dry months, so that can be done, but the cost of building an underground tank, I think that itself would be quite prohibitive rather than having a more distributive approach and going with managed aquifer recharge, which is, I agree, won't be available to that particular society in the dry months, may not be. If everyone does it at a city level, then I'm sure everyone can reap the benefits in the dry months of that.
Okay, so it can actually be something that a town or a city can take up as a flagship project on their own.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, so what I hear from you is that there are many solutions already there available. It's just a matter of proactive approach to start using some of those. Which brings me to the next question, right? There's this buzzword that keeps floating around lately about desalination. Um, it does seem like a brilliant idea to be able to just extract either seawater or probably soiled water in water bodies and use that for everyday use. Do you think that's really the holy grail of water solutions as it's made out to be, or is it more expensive, not applicable to an Indian environment? What is happening on that?
So yeah, it is certainly a part of the solution. It's not the solution. It's certainly a part of the solution. So the desalination, well, it's more applicable to regions or coastlines and maybe up to 30 to 40 kilometers, not even 40, maybe 20 to 30 kilometers inside the coastline. Because after that, the cost of pumping water uh, deep inside the peninsular region
Of course, that would
is
already.
much more. So desalination is useful for coastal areas, coastal cities, coastal industrial complexes, and that is being done across the world right now as we speak. And it is certainly a good source or good method or good technology to have where you don't have any other option. Why I say that is because that's the most expensive of all the options as well.
Yeah.
So depending again on the geography, the salinity of the sea around the intake of how the cost of the intake of the seawater that needs to be done for the desalination plant, that dictates the cost a lot. But let's say on an average, we are seeing the cost of seawater between 40 to even 80 rupees a meter cube or 1000 liters, or 40 to 80 rupees per 1000 liter. Whereas the surface water or dam restored water, even if you internalize all the costs that are not being captured through subsidies and everything, we are at about 10 to 12 rupees a meter cube. So there is a 4 to 8 times delta, times 4 to 8x delta when it comes to seawater desalination as a water supply as against fresh water. So the other portion which I mentioned earlier is treated wastewater. So treated wastewater is actually, again, there are mental or social limits to that, how much you can use treated wastewater, especially for potable purposes. But if you keep that aside for a moment, treated wastewater or treating wastewater to the levels of what is required by potable users by World Health Organizations, that will cost somewhere around 25. So fresh water is around 10, let's say. Treated wastewater could be between 20 to 25 rupees a kiloliter or per meter cube. And seawater is the most expensive, which is 40 to 80 rupees a meter cube.
It's probably the last resort,
It is
but
the
an
last resort.
available option for places which have no freshwater resorts.
Absolutely. It is the last resort, and also resorts where there is a competitive demand. For example, in coastal Maharashtra, for example, there is if any refinery or a power plant is coming up, there is a competitive demand with the other local population base. Mumbai, Ratnagiri, Raigad, Sindhudurg, wherever. So there, the government then does not allocate the fresh water to the industry, then they have to fend for themselves in terms of putting up their own desalination plant. Having said that, despite or even if you accept the expense of desalination, the environmental impact of desalination also needs to be factored in, because it's a reverse osmosis process. The similar you have in your homes is just a larger scale reverse osmosis system, wherein the reject that comes out from the treatment system, that is extremely high salinity, and it needs to be disposed of very responsibly into the ocean. Otherwise, there would be you might have read about the bleaching of the coral reefs.
Yes.
So such kind of, if impacts are seen, if they are not handled and disposed of responsibly, so that's also a challenge when it comes to seawater desalination, apart from the basic cost of seawater desalination. So it's a last resort of sorts. But wherever there is no alternative, it is a viable alternative, because there is no other alternative.
Yeah, understood. I'm glad you brought up the environmental impact part, right? Because you are working on, say, river projects as well, including the Clean Ganga mission. And there's a lot of talk that happens about how one can navigate the complexities of balancing environmental conservation with socioeconomic needs. So when we're talking about the river systems in India, or for that matter, the same thing of using seawater for potable demands in coastal areas, geographic demands will vary across the country. But then the environmental impact of our actions on each of these socioeconomic needs also needs to be accounted for. So how do you balance this when you're working on a project like the Ganga one?
So yeah, it's a balancing act. I mean, there is no black or white answer. It is that we need to balance out, hear out all the pros and cons, and take a conscious decision at the end to balance out the local or the region specific compulsions. When I say compulsions, it's not necessarily economic compulsion, but also environmental compulsions. Because in some areas, if there is a protected zone for whatever reasons, for example, I remember when the Atal Setu was inaugurated, there was a whole documentary which was done on how the mangroves and the flamingos nesting places were protected, because it's not just for them, but also for us as an insurance policy against storms for Mumbai, that protecting the mangroves. So these concerns and all these facets need to be balanced out. I would just like to share a framework that Sea Ganga or National Mission on Clean Ganga has prepared in how to think about river-based economic development or river systems development. So they call it the 5 pillars, and each has an actionable item associated with that. So the first pillar is Aviral Dhara, that is, or Aviral Ganga or Aviral Krishna, whatever, how you want to call it. So Aviral Dhara, that is flowing river, flowing stream. Second is, so how do you ensure environmental flows or water is there in the rivers? That's the first aspect. Second is Nirmal Dhara, that is the quality. It should be pure or clean to the best possible extent. Third is what they call as the Jan Dhara, that is people's connect. Whether people who are dependent on that river ecosystem, are they connected with the river? Because that gives a sense of closeness, a sense of ownership to the people. They protect it.
And it is, right? Most of the places across India are very connected to their local rivers, and it's always considered almost like a part of the community, the river bodies.
So the third pillar is Jan Dhara. Fourth is Gyan Dhara. That is the knowledge economy. The rivers, their history, what can it teach, and the ecosystems that are there, how we can use them for other purposes across India, across the world. That's the Gyan or the knowledge stream. And the fifth, which is most important, without which everything else falls, is Arthadhara. That is the economic aspect of it. So we need to look at these 5 pillars in a way that the river ecosystem becomes self-sustainable and supports economic development in the economic development sense, which is suitable for that ecosystem. So it is ultimately also the government and the people need to understand that each river system has certain pros and cons in terms of what kind of economic development they can support. So that needs to be appreciated. But once that is appreciated, we can take a reference of these 5 action areas to develop a roadmap or a policy action plan to plan the river basin management and the economic development around the river. There.
On that note, then what do you think about the whole river linking project that is being proposed? I know there's we can dedicate an entire episode on just that conversation,
So,
but if just a quick glimpse into this.
So again, from a water security perspective, it is it would be required at some point. But at the same time, there are genuine concerns about the ecology and the ecosystem disruptions when the river from or water from one river is diverted into another river, because we don't realize, but even though we see it as water, the ecosystem and the fauna flora that depend on it, they have a very intense relationship with that specific water. Ganga water is actually very specific relationship with the flora fauna there. Krishna will have a very specific. So it has a good rationale in terms of preventing flooding and supplying water where it is needed most if there is drought. But at the same time, these other nuances also need to be factored in while planning the systems. So it is, again, nothing is black or white. It's a gray area, but it needs to be appreciated and planned accordingly.
Right. And do you think that maybe it's even possible to just shelve this project or the idea if at all we have better solutions in terms of also just better management and
Yeah, absolutely. So if we can do the demand management right, to save water and reduce consumption, if we have the right amount of groundwater recharge through lesser, or even if not lesser concretization, but more rainwater harvesting and more percolation systems, the problems, so the reason for river interlinking is either floods or droughts. So if both of these can be addressed through demand management, through groundwater protection and recharge, proper recharge, and now more importantly, we are talking about climate change, so climate resilient. If we can build our infrastructure more climate resilient, if that is done, perhaps the need for water, the river interlinking might not be as urgent as what we perceive it to be right now.
Interesting. So I am a firm believer in nature-based solutions, right? So I really feel like if that is a priority area for the government and even people around, then perhaps we can save the rivers and keep them as is to conserve further ecosystems as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think moving on to that, I'd like to know a little bit from your point of view, right, about if you had, say, a magic wand and you could change any or bring in any one policy or an initiative to address the water management issues in India, what would it be? What would be the most impactful solution according to you?
I would take the liberty to say 2 of them. One is have a sustainable, implementable, and a practical water tariff regime. So water needs to be paid for. This is a reality. This is a reality of life. We cannot run away from that. Water needs to be paid for. If you're using water, you need to pay for water you use. How much is a different question, but you need to first appreciate the fact that you need to pay for it. So a sustainable, practical, and an implementable water tariff regime across India, and not just India, across the world, in fact, is one area which will have the highest impact in terms of any kind of other measures that we try to implement. Because automatically, once it hits your pocket, people start conserving that commodity or that good automatically. So that's one. The second is cropping patterns. So this is more so the water tariff is both for urban and rural, and for the on the agricultural side, cropping patterns. I think it's one area, especially for India, that will go a long way in terms of protecting and conserving the water resources. Because what is happening right now, because of the mismatch in the resource availability and the type of crops that are grown in that region, I think that is exacerbating the situation beyond anyone's control. So having the right cropping patterns, incentivizing people for having the right cropping patterns in the given geography, I think this is the second area where, if done properly, can have a large impact in terms of saving the water, both in the groundwater as well as the surface water.
Have you come across any initiatives that are actively working on changing this?
So farm laws was one of them, what we have seen. But proactively, what we are seeing is that the initiative around millets, I think that will go a long way to. It's not just about cropping pattern for water, but it's also cropping pattern from a climate protection perspective.
Of course,
These
right.
crops are very climate resilient, and that's where it's. I would look at it as an insurance policy against extreme temperatures and extreme climate changes. So
I think it's all of it, right? Water security, food
yeah,
security as well, and overall conservation of the soil as well. I think
absolutely.
we really need to take a look at our.
In fact, it's a very good point you mentioned about soil, which I just take a minute to address this point, because of the overuse of fertilizers, and that's again a part of the cropping patterns. Because of the overuse of fertilizers and inefficient irrigation techniques in agriculture, the runoffs into the water bodies of nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus. Thank you so much that you see the eutrophication and the water hyacinth growth in most of the water bodies across at least this part of the world, in this part of Maharashtra. And one of the reasons is the non-point sources of agricultural fertilizer runoffs. So if you have the right food security policy, if you have the right cropping pattern policy, it'll kind of feed into a self-fulfilling prophecy wherein you need less fertilizer. The lesser fertilizer you need, the lesser runoff. The lesser runoff, the more pure the water, and it's a cycle that feeds on itself.
Now, based on this, I'm glad you brought this because my next question was, I think we've spoken enough about conservation, about management of water, but an underlying thread that never escapes India on a global front as well, right, is about the quality of the water. How safe is it? What are the kind of releases or emissions that we put out in our local water bodies or even in the seas around? So many examples come to mind, right? Where you've seen pictures of, say, in Bihar or in Delhi, industrial waste actually frothing up entire local lakes or ponds. So what is happening on that front? Are we taking it seriously enough on a policy front, on a government level, to really clean up our ways and not let industrial pollution reach water bodies?
No, we are not taking it seriously, and the impact and the result we are seeing, as you rightly said, in the lakes and the ponds and the rivers. So here the primary issue is going to be about how do we look at wastewater. So if we look at wastewater as something that needs to be disposed of, nothing is going to change. Look at wastewater as something that's we can reuse or repurpose for other purposes, and there has to be a policy framework associated with that, which is there in certain areas, but the implementation is lacking. Then the outlook towards how used water is being repurposed, I think that will change a lot. And the second aspect also here is that we are only talking about the macro pollutants. So, like nitrogen, phosphorus, particularly from our from the toilet flushes that we see, and also from the agricultural runoffs. We are not too much focused, or rather, I would say it's high time that we focus on micro pollutants. That is the chemicals that enter the water bodies from using shampoos, soaps, detergents, oils, and all that. So that is actually a bigger threat than these micro pollutants that we see. And this is not just an India concern. This is a global concern, because globally, the use of personal care items, that is going to go on increasing. But problem is that we don't have enough studies or enough research to suggest that what are the harmful impacts of these chemicals and in what concentration. So right now, we may not be feeling the impacts, but let's say over the next 15, 20, 30, 40 years, if the pollutant concentration of these micropollutants increases substantially because of perceived, and mind you, these pollutants are not necessarily removed in the treatment plant, no matter how efficient the treatment plant is.
Exactly.
So if the concentration build up over the next 3, 4, 5 decades, what impact it will have on human health, we don't frankly know yet. There have been certain very preliminary studies in terms of how these chemicals are impacting aquatic life. because the wastewater treatment plants are not able to remove these micropollutants. They enter the water bodies and they're having some impact on the aquatic life. There have seen endocrine disruptors, endocrine disruptions that are happening in aquatic life. But how and when this will affect human health, there is not enough evidence surrounding that. But regardless, we need to be mindful of our usage of these chemicals, no matter what. But regardless, whether you have a regulation for there or not, US has recently introduced a regulation for the micropollutants, but still in infancy. But regardless whether you have regulation or not, that does not stop you from using that water or repurposing that water, again, referring to my earlier point, for potable purposes.
Correct.
You can use it for gardening, washing, flushing. So mandates for having separate flushing lines in certain large societies as well. So you can always repurpose the used water with the sufficient amount of treatment that is already available to repurpose it for other purposes, gardening, washing, coach, railways washing. Government can play a big role in washing. In fact, in Pune, Pimpri Chinchwad, they are mandating use of treated wastewater for construction purposes as well.
And is that already on the cards, or
it is implemented, but it's not. It's implemented, but it's not enforced.
So I mean, which is usually the obstacle.
So there are several reasons to it. I think over time it will happen because Bangalore, mother is a necessity of. What do you say?
Necessity is the mother of
invention. Absolutely. So what has happened in Bangalore is exactly case in point, that because of the water crisis, now they are required to look at these measures of, repurposing wastewater for construction purposes. Even they are going up to the level of recharging the groundwater with the treated wastewater through lakes.
Okay.
So that's what, and the water quality is a concern, but it needs to be segregated in a way that is not affecting human health directly as of now. As I said, we don't know when that tipping point would occur, but there is no evidence to support that tipping point as of now for us.
Right. I guess the best way is to assume that it's going to happen and work in reverse to conserve the maximum that we can. Siddharth, I think we are already pretty deep into this conversation. It's not going to be an easy one to wrap up of sorts, but I had a couple of last questions to ask of you. One being, could we summarize some of these challenges, the biggest challenges you see in front of us today in terms of water and climate? And then the last one would be that what is the silver lining in all of this?
So I think I'll take the second question first. The silver lining that we have is that once the urgency is known, then people act and they have the power to change. But getting the people accept that sense of urgency, I think, is going to be critical for citizens alike as well as the government. Because once, and again, the Cape Town example in 2018, to some extent, what's happening in Bangalore right now, our case in point, that till we reach a crisis point, nobody takes it seriously. But once you reach a crisis point, I think the entire society gets into collaborative action and solutions are found out in a very short time. So once that tipping point is reached, I'm sure that society will find a way. But the question is, how do we kind of catch it early and not allow it to get to the tipping point? I think that's the challenge that we have. So that, I would say, is the silver lining. Now, it comes to the challenges that we have. Obviously, climate change is, and the climate, rather than climate change, the climate uncertainty, because how it's going to affect water systems, although we know, but there are a lot of unknown unknowns. There are known unknowns and there are unknown unknowns. So we need to look at how do we adapt our infrastructure and have a more climate resilient infrastructure in place. So that's something that we as a country need to look at. Also, the water equity part that you asked earlier, I think that is also a crucial part, because ensuring that all the people have access to water in the right quantity, I think that is a challenge. And the third challenge is water quality, as we discussed. So water quality, water equity, and climate resilience. I think these are three main challenges. And solutions are possible. Only thing is we need to not wait until the tipping point. for that.
Right. Yeah. No, I think I would love to do a few deep dive episodes at some point later on each of these because I think they deserve a discussion on their own as well, with probably some case studies and solutions from an Indian point of view. Um, but the point of the podcast right now, anyway, is to understand what individuals can do against these lofty topics that sometimes can feel overwhelming and really way out of our uh, own sort of doing. So, what would you say to people who are listening to this? What could be the small steps they can take to be of some use to the community, to their own individual water crisis as well?
So some steps that each of us can take. One is replace your sinks and bathroom fittings with low flow fittings. So
Mm-hmm.
aerator nozzles, as they are referred to. So that reduces the water consumption drastically. Second is, if you have RO, if you are required to put RO, try to repurpose the reject that is coming from water for floor mopping or something like that. Don't throw away that reject water. You repurpose it. Similarly, washing vegetables, water that is used for washing vegetables, don't put in the drain because it's not. It can be repurposed again for floor
Okay.
mopping, gardening in your house. So that you can do. Also, common behavioral changes. Be mindful of how much time you're taking your showers. Be mindful of whether you're keeping the tap open while brushing your teeth. So on and so forth. Most importantly, when you're drinking water from a glass or a bottle, ensure that you finish it. Especially in restaurants, also, you need to be mindful that whatever water is there in your glass, you need to finish it. And ask the servers not to pour in more water unless needed. So, these small behavioral changes, along with very small investments in terms of these aerator nozzles, being mindful of repurposing water that is already being used for some other purposes. These small steps can have a multiplier effect on the entire country, which, we really cannot. I mean, it would seem a small step for each household to do that. But if all of the 50, 60 crore households do it across India, I think that will be a game changer for the country without
I
any
really
additional
hope.
investment. And the investment is very less for this.
Yeah, I really hope that we can actually achieve some behavioral changes and not wait, like you said, until the tipping point.
And
Um,
water harvesting in your societies.
yes, of course, and make
Yeah.
sure that it's not just for
It is
compliance
functional.
measures,
Yeah.
but actually being used as well. Thank you so much for your time and this really nice, insightful discussion. I think I learned a lot more about what's happening on a policy level, even though it is a slightly dim view of the coming future and the present as well. I think knowing reality sometimes helps in trying to change our own approach towards it. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to put in some links of your work and even some of the things that you mentioned as solutions for people. But if they want to reach out, I will also give your details to have
Yeah,
more.
so the best way to reach out is from X or former Twitter. You can just DM me and I will be able to respond.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We're also available on other social media. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. See you around for the next episodes.